Have you ever witnessed an injustice so blatant that it made your blood boil? Watch this story and tell us if you were in this situation, what would you do? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment on where you're watching from. Chapter 1. The Diner. Franklin Carter stepped into the quiet diner, his worn green military jacket hugging his frame against the morning chill. The bell above the door jingled softly, but no one really looked up. A few regulars sat in their booths, sipping coffee, lost in their newspapers or their own thoughts. The only person who acknowledged him was a weary-looking waitress behind the counter, who gave him a brief, indifferent nod. Franklin chose a table near the window, set his backpack down on the floor, and rested his calloused hands on the table. He glanced at his watch. His son, Jalen, was late, but Franklin didn't mind. Decades in the military had taught him patience. He felt the glances, quick, fleeting looks that darted away the moment his gaze met them. It wasn't the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. A black man sitting alone in a diner filled mostly with white patrons. In a neighborhood he didn't frequent, of course, people noticed. But he ignored it. He was used to it. Eventually the waitress approached, a coffee pot in hand. "What can I get you?" "Just coffee, thanks," Franklin replied with a small smile. She poured his coffee without a word and walked away. Franklin lifted the cup, letting the quiet, albeit slightly tense atmosphere of the diner settle around him. He barely registered the door chime ringing again, but he sensed it, a presence, heavy and deliberate. A tall police officer stepped inside, his boots thudding against the tiled floor. Franklin glanced up for just a second, but it was enough to catch the officer's attention. The man, Officer Travis Langley, according to his badge, locked eyes with Franklin like a missile locking onto a target. Langley walked over, his boots echoing with each step, stopping directly in front of Franklin's table. "Lost, old man?" The officer's voice was sharp, carrying an unmistakable edge of contempt. Franklin remained calm. "I'm waiting for my son," he replied, taking a sip of coffee. Langley's jaw tightened. "I don't see many folks like you around here. How long you planning to wait?" Franklin raised an eyebrow, his tone steady. "As long as I need to." The officer smirked. "This isn't a place to hang around. Makes people uneasy." Franklin set his coffee cup down gently. "I'm just having coffee." "Show me your ID," Langley snapped. Franklin didn't hesitate. Langley. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and slid out his veteran's ID, placing it on the table. Langley snatched it up, barely glancing at it before tossing it back. "Veteran, huh? Not sure I buy it." Franklin didn't flinch. "Believe it or not, it's the truth." But Langley leaned in, his shadow casting over the table. "You people always got a story." Franklin's fingers tightened slightly around his coffee cup, but his voice remained level. "Do you have a problem with me, officer?" The air in the diner grew thick. Langley's hand twitched near his belt. "My problem is people like you thinking you can just walk in anywhere and expect respect." Franklin tilted his head slightly. "I'm just a man having coffee." Langley scoffed. "You don't belong here." He reached across the table and shoved Franklin's coffee cup. The hot liquid spilled over the table, soaking into Franklin's jacket. The entire diner fell silent. Conversation stopped. The waitress froze mid-pour at another table. Franklin inhaled deeply, steadying himself. "I'm waiting for my son," he said firmly, "and I'm not going anywhere." Langley's nostrils flared. "All right then, we'll do this the hard way." Before Franklin could react, Langley grabbed his arm and yanked him up. The sharp clink of metal filled the diner as handcuffs snapped around Franklin's wrists. "You're under arrest for disturbing the peace," Langley growled. Silence suffocated the room. A few patrons stood, their mouths opening as if to protest, but one by one, they sat back down, choosing the safety of silence. Langley sneered, then spit on Franklin's jacket before dragging him toward the door. Chapter 2. The Arrest. The ride to the police station was silent. Franklin sat in the back seat, feeling the cold metal of the handcuffs digging into his wrists. Through the rearview mirror, he could see Langley's face, smug, jaw clenched as if he had just won a personal victory. Feeling big now, officer? Franklin broke the silence. Langley didn't respond, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened. Be careful with the people you look down on, Franklin added. The officer let out a dry, hollow laugh. Why? You think anyone cares about an old man like you? Franklin chuckled lowly, his voice carrying the weight of a growl. More than you think. When they arrived at the station, Langley led Franklin inside, parading him past desks and fellow officers. No one said a word, but more than a few raised their brows at the sight of an elderly black veteran being dragged through the precinct in handcuffs. Cell 3. Langley barked at the desk sergeant. Franklin was shoved inside, the heavy metal door slamming shut behind him. He sat down on the cold bench, his body aching, but his spirit unshaken. His gaze shifted to the barred window, where the afternoon sun cast streaks of dust into the air. He knew it wouldn't be long before Jalen found out. And when that happened, Langley was in for a surprise. Chapter 3. The sun arrives. 30 minutes later, the sharp sound of dress shoes echoed through the station. Where is he? A voice boomed. Detective Jalen Carter strode through the precinct, his badge gleaming at his side, his face flushed with fury. Langley looked up from his desk, his complexion turning pale. Detective, I. Where is my father? Langley swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. I didn't know he was your father. Jalen closed the distance between them in 2 steps. That's not the damn point. His voice cut through the room, commanding attention. You didn't see a father. You didn't see a veteran. All you saw was a black man, and you thought you could treat him however you wanted. The room fell into a stunned silence. Jalen's fists clenched at his sides. You spit on him. Langley stammered. He wasn't cooperating, he wouldn't leave. Jalen shoved him back. He was waiting for me. You put a 70-year-old man in cuffs over a damn cup of coffee. The surrounding officers remained still, the tension thick in the air. Jalen pushed past Langley, heading straight for the holding cells. The sergeant at the desk unlocked the door without a word. Franklin sat there, completely at ease. But when he saw Jalen, the anger in his son's eyes softened, replaced by something else, guilt. Dad, Jalen murmured, stepping inside. Franklin looked up, a small smile tugging at his lips. Took you long enough. Jalen exhaled heavily, kneeling to unlock the cuffs. I'm sorry, Dad. Franklin cut him off. You're here. That's what matters. But Jalen clenched his jaw. This isn't over. Chapter 4. Justice. The police station's conference room was packed the next day. Officers, internal affairs, and even a few local reporters were present. Langley sat stiffly at the end of the table, trying to hold on to the last remnants of his dignity, but the sweat on his palms betrayed him. Jalen stood at the front of the room. Officer Langley abused his authority, disrespected a decorated veteran, and violated a citizen's civil rights. His voice rang out, cutting through the room, and he did so with an arrogance that is simply unacceptable. Langley opened his mouth to speak, but Jalen shut him down with a sharp glare. You spat on him, you humiliated him, and you did it because you thought you could. Murmurs spread through the room. Jalen continued, Internal Affairs has reviewed the footage from your body camera. Everything is there, your aggression, your disregard. The Internal Affairs inspector stood up. Officer Langley, your badge is hereby revoked. You are terminated, effective immediately. Langley's face crumbled. He stood trying to say something, but no one was listening. As he was escorted out, Jalen's gaze flickered to his father, who stood quietly at the back of the room. Chapter 5. A Legacy of Respect. That evening, father and son sat on Franklin's porch, the sound of crickets filling the warm night air. You did the right thing, Franklin said, taking a sip of sweet tea. Jalen looked down at his hands. Dad, he spat on you, and he'll have to live with that shame for the rest of his life. Franklin replied. You made sure of that. Jalen stared at him, frustration still lingering in his chest. I wish it had never happened. Franklin placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. What matters is what you did after it happened. Jalen exhaled, a small smile forming as some of the weight lifted from his heart. Not every battle is fought with fists, Franklin added. some are fought with principles. As the night deepened, Jalin sat there feeling an unshakable sense of pride in being Franklin's son. He knew the fight for true respect wasn't over, but he was certain he was ready for it. Chapter 6. A Remainder. As Jalin stepped into the precinct, some colleagues nodded at him, while others avoided his gaze. He didn't care. Justice didn't always make people comfortable. When he reached his desk, a neatly folded note lay on top. His heartbeat quickened as he opened it. Only a few words scrawled in messy handwriting. "You think you can change things? Don't be stupid." Jalin clenched the paper, his jaw tightening. He wasn't surprised. Men like Langley never acted alone. This wasn't over. If someone thought they could scare him into backing down, they were dead wrong. Chapter 7. The Price of Silence.